Well, hello again. Welcome back. Uh, we're doing How to Read a Book, part two. This is chapter 9, Determining an Author's Message. So, when analyzing a book, it might prove useful to think of the endeavor as a business deal, but in reverse. So, in a business deal, you find out what the offer is, and then you come to terms if you're interested. When reading a book in depth, you must come to terms with an author first and then figure out what the proposition is and whether you agree with it or not. So, good authors not only have arguments, right, i.e., reasons to back up their claims or opinions, but these are usually arranged in the following manner, right? Here's what I think, here's why I think it, and here's why it matters, right? Or here's how you can apply it, or here's why you should care. Good writers generally build their arguments gradually, introducing words or terms first, then forming phrases and sentences that help their arguments along, and finally crafting a string of sentences, culminating in paragraphs. If you have created one, your outline of the book, can help you identify key propositions and arguments. So an outline allows you to pinpoint the major parts of a book. Once this is done, you can then look for the important words in those parts, working your way up from these terms in order to decipher the author's main contention. Before we move on, recall from the last chapter that some words can have several meanings and that one meaning can be expressed by more than one word. Okay, so to determine an author's message, which is the title and aim of this chapter, you must carry this knowledge to the sentence level. Okay, so just because a sentence is grammatically simple, okay, so in other words, it's not compound, it's not complex, it's not compound complex, does not necessarily mean that it only expresses one idea, right? As most people are taught. Okay, even do I teach it this way? Anyway, okay, that's a story for another time. Okay, needless to say, the other types of sentences almost always have more than one idea, right? But to agree or disagree with an author, you as a reader must first be generous, right? What do I mean by generous? Generous in the sense that you must put forth an honest effort to understand what the author is saying, right? To this end, you will inevitably need grammar, boring and tedious as it might sometimes be. Okay. We come to them finally. Okay, we've done 5 rules so far, so here are rules 6 and 7. Rule 6: highlight the most important sentences and find out what propositions they contain. And rule 7: construct the main arguments of a text via the connections between these important sentences. The next logical question and the next step is to ask how, right? How does one find and interpret these key sentences? Okay, the answer is similar to the one given before about finding key terms, right? If some sentences are difficult to understand, or if the author has repeated them or the ideas that they contain frequently, right? These, among others, are signs one must be on the lookout for. The key terms you have singled out will aid you here because they are often contained in sentences where the main argument hinges. Okay, the opposite is also true, by the way. If you identify important sentences, you will surely find critical terms in them. Okay? Finally, learn to recognize arguments, which are usually a sequence of paragraphs offering evidence or conclusions. Undoubtedly, important sentences will be found there. Okay? In the case of this book, at the end of many of these chapters, as I said also at the beginning, the authors, they tend to summarize, right? And this is especially true for the rules that they give. Okay, so obviously this is important to them. Okay, and likewise, these summaries are important, right? They act to refresh your memory in case you've forgotten about any of them, and B, they're said in different and more straightforward terms. Okay, making sure that you understand them. So I've mentioned several times in my summary of this book that you cannot understand a book properly by reading it only once. Okay, we come back to this. And here's another reason why this is so. When one reads a text for the first time, even an expository one, okay, there's a curiosity that must be satiated before one can begin to analyze. Okay, so not only do you not have a grasp of the entire book and its structure, okay, you're reading because you're curious. You're right. You're curious as to what's going to happen next. Okay, and this curiosity gets in the way of analyzing. Okay, so assuming the book interests you, the novelty will more often than not completely wear off. Okay, only after you finish the book. It is when this novelty wears off that you're ready to ask the questions necessary to analyze and understand. Before that, your curiosity is usually in the way. Okay, great. Back to the author's propositions. One of the simplest and most effective ways of measuring your understanding of the propositions of a text is to restate them using your own words. Okay, we've touched upon this before. Many people say they understand. If you ask them, have you understood? Okay, as a teacher, we've all been there. Okay, you ask your students, hey, have you understood? And they say, yeah. And say, okay, can you explain it to me? Oh, no, I can't. Right? And the reason they can't is not necessarily because they're shy, right? It's because it's hard, right? It's hard to explain something simply and without using too many words, superfluity, right? Or being redundant, repeating yourself needlessly. It's tough. It's hard. So, yeah. So a clear sign that you haven't really understood is an over-reliance on the author's word, right? If you need to use the author's word as a crutch, then you've probably not understood what's going on. Okay? Words will have been exchanged between the two of you, but not the meaning behind them. Okay? Another test is to ask yourself, how relevant is this argument to my life? Okay, where have I seen it being applied? Or how can I see it being applied? Okay, what you read must be applicable to daily life somehow. Okay, be it in the realm of thinking or in the realm of action or behavior. Okay, if you cannot see the connection, it probably means that your analysis needs elaboration, right? You need to dig deeper. You need to think more. Okay, assuming, of course, you're reading a good book, right? That an author has carefully put together. Okay, moving on. What about the author's arguments? One major challenge here is that there is no strict definition of a paragraph, right? If there were, you could go by length, right? Everything above 8 lines in a paragraph, means it's an argument or, gearing up to an argument or something. Unfortunately, some people argue one sentence could be a paragraph. Okay, so paragraphs vary in length and they vary in content. So what we're concerned with here is essentially the number of arguments. Some paragraphs contain more than one, while the same argument may run through several paragraphs. So this is something to be aware of. All right. Being aware of this is the first step to recognizing arguments. Okay, so I say it again. One paragraph may have more than one argument, and one argument may run, through several paragraphs. Authors that emphasize clarity will aid you by intermittently summarizing their key points. Okay, you can help them, and you can help yourself by pausing at these key moments and ensuring you have truly understood what has been summarized before going on. Okay, if an argument is sound, anyone should be able to state it simply and using only a few words. Okay, do you need to be an expert logician in order to do all of this? No. Okay, here are a few steps to keep in mind. First, if you discover a conclusion, there will probably be reasons that precede it. Okay, if you see reasons, they must lead somewhere. Okay. Second, see whether you'll need inductive or deductive reasoning. Okay, the former, so inductive reasoning, goes from specific too general, while the latter assumes a general premise and proceeds to give specific evidence. Okay, there's not one is not superior or inferior to the other. Okay, it depends on many things. Okay, it depends on the topic at hand, the genre in general, and it depends on the style of an author. Okay. The third and final step asks you, the reader, to be aware of the author's assumptions. Okay? All authors, honest or otherwise, need some form of assumptions in order to prove their points. Okay? Nothing can be established if everything needs to be proven. Okay? So there are some things that an author takes for granted. Okay? So just because he asks you to take it for granted, what I mean to say is, if an author asks you to take something for granted, okay, give him or her the benefit of the doubt and take it for granted and see where the argument goes. Okay? After that, assess. Okay? After that, give your judgment. After that, give your opinion. Okay? It's, how do I put it? It's intellectual etiquette, okay, to do so. All right. It is time to bring this chapter to a close. Okay. Recall that the first stage of analytical reading involved rules 1 to 4, which were related to the outline. These new rules, to which we will add one more, deal with the interpretation of the book's contents. The last rule is this: find out what the author's solutions are. Okay. So you've identified his or her main arguments. How successful was he or she in solving them? Okay. To recap, here are rules 5 to 8, taken from page 136. Come to terms with the author by interpreting his keywords. One of the criticisms of Adler, right? Product of his time. So no his or her, or they, or anything. Okay, just his keywords. So come to terms with the author by interpreting his keywords. 6, grasp the author's leading propositions by dealing with his most important sentences. 7, know the author's arguments by finding them in or constructing them out of sequences of sentences. 8, determine which of his problems the author has solved and which he has not. And as to the latter, decide which the author knew he had failed to solve. Thanks. I'll see you in the next chapter.